Imagine this, it's November 16th, 2024. You're still reeling from Act 1 of the final chapter of Arcane, which was absolutely insane, blew your mind, and lived up to the name and renown of Arcane. Then the brilliance of Singed gives life to Warwick and this beloved champion is introduced to the public at last. Vander has been turned into this monstrous, inhuman creature, from a storytelling viewpoint and from an artistic viewpoint, which could arguably be considered the same viewpoint. The sky is the limit. The potential is exactly as raw and unchained, just as limitless and boundless as Warwick himself. For people like me who are aware of what might occur next, and for amazed, oblivious audience members alike, the excitement is unmatched. And then they waste 3 minutes of our precious time with this flashback, this confusing, pointless flashback that clashes with what little information we had so far concerning Vander, Silco, and Vian Powder's deceased parents. A very odd choice, and they slap the sort of scene that belongs in a poorly written Netflix romance movie in our unsuspecting faces. Or am I too dramatic? Is there a hidden gem somewhere in this decision? I mean, after all, this is Arcane we're talking about. I won't expand on what might have been done instead. If I start listing every aspect of the show that could have used these priceless minutes, we would still be here in 4 days. But anyone who has experienced Arcane knows very well that there is a dizzying amount of information and scenes that were cut from the show. If you have seen Arcane, you will also know that 3 minutes of screen time is not in any way meant to be underestimated. The pace of this show and the excruciating amount of details in every single frame undoubtedly support this. Every choice in Arcane is purposeful, because on one hand, they have to animate every single scene. On the other hand, I'll repeat it, we know that there are so many elements that were taken out, because they did not have time to include them. Someone chose to show the audience this scene. They made the decision to have the team go through the entire process of writing it, drawing a storyboard, animating it, making a soundtrack, editing it, recording the voiceovers, and so on. As you can tell already, and especially if you know me personally, I love to dive deep. Today I will dive deep into the value of this scene, its repercussions, and how its meaning has changed 1 year after Act 2 was released. At least I'll review this situation with as much depth as I can logically allow myself to embrace, knowing that the entire internet can witness it. Because something has come to my attention lately, and now I cannot shut up about Vander, Silco, and Felicia. To make this as bearable as possible for you, dearest audience, I've divided the contents of this video to the best of my ability. If you haven't already skipped ahead to the subject or section that interests you, allow me to say this. I love Arcane. Like many people who also love Arcane, we are aware that fiction can be interpreted, and our interpretation is what we will likely keep with us from the art we've witnessed. So, no matter the dissatisfactions I'll find and pry apart into details today, it will always be my own responsibility to interpret Arcane and keep the parts that made me happy and that changed me for the best. Like everyone, I'm allowed to have my own perception of the show. For me personally, it is important that my perception aligns with reasonable hints and the lore of the story, and I'll quickly explain some of my own vocabulary to address these subjects. There are roughly 4 aspects to every piece of art, in simple terms: what the artist wants to tell us, what we think the artist is trying to tell us, what we understand, and finally what we choose to understand. The last 2 categories are very similar, but I make the distinction between what I understand and what I choose to understand, because for me what I understand is what I am logically seeing, what seems obvious to me, it is my first impression. Then what I choose to understand involves a choice. It involves taking apart my impressions and reflecting upon what I think I know until I reach a satisfactory belief. Now that this has been made more obvious, it is time to rant. Chapter 1. Everything wrong with the scene itself and the love triangle implications. I will introduce a disclaimer here once more that I absolutely love Arcane, down to the pits of my stomach and my soul. Everything I will critique today stems from genuine and full admiration and love for the masterpiece that Arcane is. The fact alone that I am picking it apart with such precision is a labor of love. I wrote this frantic essay because I care so much about Arcane. And that is something I need everyone who is listening to this in this instant to understand and to remember throughout my rambling. The scene begins with a familiar song.
Can't a lady just be in the mood for a familiar song?
Our Love, interpreted by Jasmine Sullivan and Curtis Harding. In this scene, they only played a melody, but this song is an absolute gem from season 1. It is one of my favorites, and if you know me, you have no doubts about this. This song takes us back to the final moments of episode 2, back in season 1. It's playing in the last drop while Vander pours Powder a glass of juice, before realizing that Vi has decided to turn herself in. Therefore, as soon as we hear this melody, especially inside the same bar, we are reminded of the two sisters and of a pivotal moment in season 1, which reinforced Vander as a father figure for Powder and Violet. We could also be reminded of the Enforcers' slight invasion of the lanes as they search for the culprit of the explosion in Jace Talis' laboratory. In both cases, we are reminded of Vander's status as the protector of the lanes, which is a recurrent theme when he is portrayed inside what we assume is his bar, the last drop. Instantly, the meaning of the song is renewed for the audience, as Vander asks the mystery woman what the occasion is for playing this specific song, and simultaneously informs us of his close acquaintance with her.
Not this lady, and not this song.
Of course, Vander and the beautiful purple-haired woman exchange quite suspicious eye contacts all throughout this exchange, and while she dances in front of them, but mostly in front of him, because Silco is focused on his notebook. Her name is Felicia, and I would say that as soon as she appears on screen, we know very well that this woman is Violet and Powder's mother. However, it is very likely that not everyone was as obsessed as I was with season 1. Naturally, a casual viewer would not have remembered her features from the few flashbacks that were sprinkled throughout the first season of Arcane. So far so good, although the body language in this scene would worry a sharp mind who fears unnecessary romance like the plague. Felicia announces her pregnancy to Vander and Silco. The bartender adorably switches out her glass of booze for a glass of juice, once more hinting at the similar scene with Powder from season 1. Here, I would very much like to point out, without judgment, that we have no idea what time it is during this scene. All we know is that the bar is deserted and, since we're in Zaun, there is never any sunlight, so the lighting cannot inform us. Does this scene take place before the last drop is functional? Considering the state of the establishment, I doubt it. The bar seems up and running to me. We can notice that most of the bottles of drinks are stocked inside of small crates, while in other scenes at the last drop from the first season, any bottles are displaced freely on the bar top. This can indicate that the last drop is in its earlier days of operation. However, since Vander is cleaning a glass at the start of the scene, we can assume that the bar has had clients before and that Vander is already its bartender. If the last drop is functional but completely deserted, what does this tell us? The easy answer is that the animators did not have the resources to animate a busy bar scene. But would that setting have made sense for what they wanted to show us anyway? The intimacy of the scene would be ruined. Therefore, we understand that this is supposed to be an intimate, private setting. Vander foreshadows it as a night of revelations.
A night of revelations.
Indeed, it is a night of confessions. Felicia reveals her pregnancy to her two friends before even telling her own partner, the father of the child, whose name we learn shortly after.
What did Connell say?
She does this while drinking in a bar, alone with them, at a time when the bar is unvisited. We can assume that in Zaun an empty bar is basically impossible, but let's say it is possible. Vander, Silco, and Felicia must be there in the late morning, in the middle of the day, or in the late afternoon. Those times are the least busy for such an establishment. Not great times to be drinking with your friends, but Zaun standards are evidently different. Or maybe this scene is just really odd. Silco seems to be having a meal and a cup of a drink without alcohol in it, so perhaps they are on a lunch break from the mines. After all, from Vander's memories in season 2, it is confirmed that Felicia also worked at the mines, probably alongside Silco and Vander, and so did Violet and Powder's biological father, Connell. Every detail is pushing this idea on us that Felicia was close with Vander and Silco too. As soon as the conversation becomes serious and personal, Silco abandons his notebook, walks closer to his friends, and proceeds to gaze tenderly at Felicia. I mentioned that we can choose to understand whatever we want from the hints that are given to us, and someone could still believe that all of these signs are signs of platonic friendship. maybe with a hint of misguided romance, but nothing serious. But then the scene begins to go downhill. First off, we get the following mess, as Felicia makes Vander and Silco promise to make Zaun a safe community where her firstborn will be able to grow up in peace, maybe even know another reality than crippling poverty and lifelong danger.
I can't protect her from all the shit down here and work out how to be a parent at the same time. Then, I realized I don't have to.
Oh, what's that?
Because the second I told you, I put you on the hook. You two are gonna figure this Zaun thing out. I don't care if you have to carve it out of the bedrock covered in blisters. You're not allowed to fail anymore. For her.
You may not know this about me, but here we go. I hate. And when I say hate, I mean I hate. I sort of dislike the promise to a dead parent trope. In this situation in particular, it is so cheap and so lazy. That unfortunately happens a lot with this trope. I feel like this idea in a story is always sort of heartbreaking, but not because we discover a new relationship between the child's parents and their caretaker or mentor. It's heartbreaking because the author basically admits that they do not trust their own weaving of the fate of these characters. They do not trust that the magic of the universe and luck were enough to bring these characters together. No. There had to be some sort of hidden connection. Plus, doesn't this always turn out to be so disappointing for the child, whose caretaker or mentor often admits to only caring about them because they knew their parents? What does this trope genuinely add to any story, ever? It is ridiculous to hold characters to this enormous task of raising children or training them or protecting them over one flimsy promise that was made to the children's deceased parents. It often is a very weak plot device, in my opinion. What purpose does this serve except to show an unnaturally strong loyalty between the adults that were concerned by the initial promise? A character wants to help or they don't, and keeping them tethered painfully to some children when a mere promise is pointless, unless the new caretaker breaks the promise or betrays the child. In the case where the caretaker and the child get along, it is unnecessary and futile. I hate people promising things to dead parents so much that I made it a point to denounce that behavior in one of my own fanfictions. In Beautiful, Jinx asked Hydra why she came back to Zaun, confronting her about her acquaintance with Vander. I make it clear that despite Hydra's questionable intentions, that she absolutely did not return to fulfill a promise, or solely because she loved Jinx's parents. Finding Jinx has very little to do with Vander, and I emphasized this. Another problematic aspect of this promise is that while I love Felicia, Vander and Silco have so many more people to save and care about. Literally, the entire population of the underground depends on them, not just her own freaking children. Perhaps their young selves are more selfish and seek power and vengeance more than actual freedom for their peers. That makes sense, but this scene definitely means to paint them as these sweet saviors who dream of freeing the Undercity. This remark from Felicia sort of misses the mark and instead pushes forward the writer's real intention.
For me.
This is a cookie-cutter love triangle scene. Come on! It's disheartening, right? And I cannot believe I am the only one who was disgusted by this completely random and unfounded turn of events. I don't blame people for thinking Felicia and Vander, or even Felicia and Silco's forbidden love story could be cute or something, but please, we deserved so much better than an easy way out. And I intend to prove that this decision was severely lacking in intelligence and cheapens a lot of other strong points of the story of Arcane that the first season had established for us. Second, Vander's memory of this night ends with him telling Felicia that she can name her daughter Violet. Although this might have only served as a way to remind the casual viewers that this woman is Violet and Powder's mother, that line is obviously serving the love triangle agenda. It also makes Felicia look not exactly terrible, but not exactly great, right? Because as if choosing to tell Vander and Silco about her pregnancy before telling Connell was not weird enough. Instead of choosing a name with Connell for their child, she names her and Connell's daughter with the first suggestion that Vander makes. Did Connell have any names he liked? The man who is her partner, and we know Connell is her established partner, because there is no doubt about the father's identity. Vander directly asks her if she made Connell aware of her pregnancy without asking if she knew who the father was, and that would have been necessary if she did not have one current and stable partner. Moving on from the bar scene, the letter from Vander to Selko that Jinx and Vi find in the mines only serves to validate my somber presumptions. The letter only proves that the writers tripped and knocked their heads a little too hard and decided to include the stupidest motive in history for a fallout between two men. A love triangle. Just listen to this one sentence.
When she died, I lost my head.
Again, putting so much importance on this one person. Hundreds of Zonites died because of Vander and Silko's dreams of an uprising against Piltover. The Vander we knew from season 1 is clearly bereft about all the people that were lost, not only some women he had a crush on. Even if she were just a friend, having him say that line pushes their stupid narrative forward. There was no need at all for a love story involving Vander, or Silko for that matter, and Felicia. The letter once more alludes to the love triangle that ruptured their complicity when Felicia died. At least if the love triangle is canon, it might be a real triangle for once. We wanted, heck needed, an actual justification to Vander's attempted murder on Silko, instead of merely blaming a love triangle gone wrong. Which, by the way, am I the only one who has noticed how the women in these love triangles always end up being blamed for the situation, or serve as a completely bogus reason for the men who desire her to act like absolute fools? In more high-stakes settings, quite like Arcane, these men are oftentimes endangering others, all in the name of their love triangle. It's pathetic because Felicia gets all the blame and the troubles, by dying, when really this scene was a beautiful opportunity to show us a glimpse of this incredible woman. After all, who could be more influential than Powder and Violet's late mother? She did not deserve to have her loyalty for Connell questioned, nor her own attractiveness weaponized as a weak justification for events that sparked the entire story of Arcane. Felicia deserves more than to be this little pawn that Vander and Silko coveted and fought over. In conclusion, the only strength of this flashback was showcasing Felicia, a character of great importance in her daughters' lives, not in Vander and Silko's. Chapter 2. The inconsistencies with what we knew from Season 1. Felicia was a crucial character in her daughters' lives, which was clear to us in Season 1. Indeed, Violet and Powder often refer to their parents. They remember them fondly, their mother especially. It was truly a wonderful idea to show the audience Felicia in her youth, while she was alive, because we know how much she means to her daughters. From Season 1 only, we could tell how formative she was to them, and that is why we cared about her, not because we thought she was connected in any way to Vi and Jinx's adoptive fathers. I believe that if they wanted to show us the old underground, from the days of Felicia's life before she was a mother, they should have showed us Felicia and her bond with her family, or with some of her friends, with people we do not know. Of course, that would have taken more effort than simply reusing the set for The Last Drop and adapting some of Silko and Vander's artwork to make them look younger. But the team at Fortiche who worked on Arcane do ambitious and quote-unquote unnecessary animation all the time. We know this! They did it constantly during the show, and showcasing Felicia on her own or with her daughters would have been 1,000-fold more meaningful. In their defense, they did this, but through, again, a flashback from Vander's point of view. Why? It would have been enough. It would have been more than enough. It would have been delightful to see Felicia with her daughters from Felicia's point of view, not from Vander's point of view, but from her point of view. She is their mother. They had a relationship with their mother that never concerned Vander, or at least that's what we believed. I'll add here that Silko never mentions Jinx and Vi's parents at all, and when Vander does, he speaks very generally about them. When he tells Vi that her parents died because they followed him up the bridge,
I was angry, just like you. I led us across this bridge. thinking things could change. If I hadn't, your parents would still be alive.
It does not sound like a personal anecdote, but more like a general fact. As if he's saying, yes, your parents died, and many more people did too. We even get to see a whole memorial area dedicated to those who fell when the Undercity tried to attack Piltover, while Vander and Vi have this conversation. If the writers were already planning some spectacular love triangle reveal, wouldn't they have taken this opportunity to at least hint at Vander's acquaintance with these people? Isn't it odd for them to lay it on so annoyingly thick in Season 2, when nothing at all from Vander's behavior in Season 1 could ever insinuate that he knew Felicia personally? Some might argue that the love triangle, or even just a pre-existing friendship between Vander, Silco, and Felicia, gives a sound argument to explain why Vander picks up Powder and Violet from the battlegrounds and adopts them, and why, later, Silco in turn also takes Powder under his wing instead of stabbing her. However, adding this so-called reasoning, and believe me, I love a good reasoning, cheapens the entire feeling of the first season. When we watched Season 1, we assumed that a divine intervention, or a higher power, call it fate, brought these people together. Watching the opening scene of Arcane, Vander does not seem extremely close to Felicia and Connell. He glances at them with some sadness, and he is acquainted with them enough to know whose parents they are, as he recognizes Vi and Powder, but he does not show any more grief than might be expected of a neighbor, or of a bartender who barely knows them. And on the topic of people being so impressed that Vander was in love with Felicia, and of course, how clever, wow, that is why he took care of Vi and Powder and all that nonsense. Hi, just a reminder, quick reminder here, Milo and Claggor, how do you explain that? Because it seems to me like the story they told about Vander was that he was a good-hearted man who took in random kids and cared for them. Now, unless you want to argue that Vander also had a crush on Milo and Claggor's biological parents at some point, I am pretty darn sure that these were random boys who found themselves without any family left, probably also losing their relatives in the incident that occurred on the bridge, or during another tragic event. As we know, those tend to happen in Zaun. When Milo tells Vi that Claggor and him will help her rescue Vander because he's their father too, it is obviously implied and validated that all four of them have no blood relation with Vander, but they are all considered his children. This is also confirmed when Silco mocks them, threatening to kill the five of them and to spread a rumor that Vander, out of cowardice, ran away, and I quote, with his children.
Have you heard the rumor? Vander the coward fled town with his children, and they were never seen again.
The narrative that fate brought Vi, Powder, Vander, and Silco together also served to corroborate the flawless parallel between these pairs of characters. One of the aspects of Arcane that I was delighted by the most was the incredible use of parallels. I was so passionate about the potential for these parallels, how they might evolve in Season 2 namely, but mostly how they were exploited with subtle beauty. The parallels we witnessed were visual as well as integral parts of the storytelling. Firstly, of course, we had the most famous parallel of Vi and Jinx versus Vander and Silco. Then, a personal favorite of mine, Jace and Victor versus Heimerdinger and Singed. Would this pair of younger scientists follow in their mentor's footsteps and break apart with their different ideals?
I must warn you, if you take this path, they will despise you. Love and legacy are the sacrifices we make for progress. It's why I parted ways with Heimerdinger.
Jace will understand.
Or would they find common ground? In Season 1, this question was teased to us. Finally, and I saw this one mentioned online before promptly falling in love with it, Mel and Ambessa Medarda versus Caitlyn and Cassandra Karaman. The perfect daughter for each other's mother, born to always feel inadequate in her own predestined role as a politician or a soldier. All of this to emphasize that the notion of fate was very strong throughout many parallels, between many characters, all throughout the fabric of the story. Therefore, Vander finding Vi and Powder felt natural already. The sisters' story mimicking the pattern of Vander and Silco's relationship felt like this beautiful coincidence, a destiny accomplished, unfurling without control, events that were meant to occur. There was no need to add acquaintances with their mother. In my mind, this lessened the sacred feeling of watching an inevitable destiny bring these souls together. Another piece of this inconsistent puzzle is Silco's behavior and role in all of the tragedies that make up the first season of Arcane. If he truly was attached to Felicia and knew both her and Connell personally in his younger days, that means that he necessarily was aware of their daughters, at the very least, too. Here are our two simple principles, which should be true according to the narrative in Season 2. Silco was secretly in love with, or merely a close friend of, Felicia, and Silco knows that Vi and Powder are her daughters, whom he swore to protect in the infamous Blisters and Bedrock scene. Note how none of the concrete examples I am about to cite function logically with these. Silco is more than willing to kill all of these kids, who he calls Vander's children, including Powder, including Vi, when they attempt to rescue him at the factory. Moreover, he is obviously mocking their bond with Vander. Vocabulary and tone give speech its meaning. It speaks to us on inexplicable levels. The contempt is real. These words are a mockery.
Vander the coward fled town with his children.
Why would he say such a thing if he knew very well that Felicia, Vander, and himself were all acquainted? Vander adopting and caring for these girls would make sense. It would not be very worthwhile to mock him or them for this. When he walks out of the factory at the end of Act 1, he calls Powder little girl.
Hello, little girl.
Of course, it would be creepy for him to call her by her name, but does he seem to know her at all? No, he does not care about this child. He only changes his attitude when he realizes that she could be valuable, when he is struck with the realization that they are alike. Indeed, confirming the parallel and the feeling that fate brought them together in this moment to understand each other. If Powder had not clung to him, she likely would have died that day. Silco's further interactions with Jinx and Vi continue to prove that he seemed to have no connection at all with Felicia. During all his speeches, which we know he had many of, Silco never once mentions Felicia. He always focuses on Vander and degrades him as Jinx's old caretaker who was actually full of flaws. Is that not strange if he supposedly was close friends with her literal mother? Then he attempts to kill Felicia's other daughter multiple times, not only as a child, notably when he meets her again as an adult for the first time, then at the family dinner in episode 9, when he is about to shoot her in front of her sister, no less. His behavior and dialogue when he meets Vi after she returned to the lanes only reinforced the idea that he never knew them nor their mother and could not care less about harming them. He greets her not as, "Oh, hello, firstborn of the woman I was secretly infatuated with," but as Vander's prodigy. Clearly, the relationship between Silco and Vander is again at the forefront. He tells her that he thought that she was the prize of her second-hand family, then reflects that Jinx is so much more than he ever could have imagined. I cannot stop myself from noting that referring to Vi and Jinx as prizes is a direct sign that he sees them as objects, as weapons, not as the daughters of a woman he was reportedly close to, either as friends or more in a non-reciprocal way. I also particularly enjoy in hindsight how this sentence might be a little wink to an earlier draft of the show. I'll put the clip here quickly instead of explaining it myself.
There was a world where Vi and Jinx were sort of swapped. Vi and Powder go to rescue Vander and everything kind of falls apart. But after that, it was Vi who fell under Silco's sway and Powder vanished.
The choice alone of the term second hand to insult her family is very eloquent to me, without even looking at the context, which is that he is about to unleash shimmered up junkies onto her with the clear goal of murdering her. Again, his words are alluding so obviously at the fact that Vander, Jinx, and Vi's family unit is some joke to him, that it is a flimsy connection, some mere whim of luck, and that these sisters are strangers to him, that he only ever learned of their existence because Vander took them in. Hence my strong impression that Silco did not care much about Felicia, if he even knew her at all. The last inconsistency I would like to bring to your attention has more to do with Vander's character himself rather than with the presumed dynamics between this trio of Vander, Silco, and our dearest Felicia. The flashback in Season 2, I'll add, portrays Vander as this sweet, thoughtful, perchance rough around the edges, yet ambitious and driven young man. I personally find that they made him and Silco, for that matter, look extremely clean, well put together and polished. I mean, I'm not imagining that Vander's eyes are close to glowing in the dark in this scene. He almost looks angelic or otherworldly, especially in the context of Zaun. Although they may be young in this flashback, the minds of Zaun certainly already were in effect, and they are much too old to not be already employed there. Let's say we forgive them for not making the three of them look unhealthy and weathered. After all, the gases from the fissures and the grueling work in the mines may not have begun to affect them at that point in time. I am also aware that the aged-up version of Vander we met in Season 1 is approximately 15 years older and has gone through his share of traumatic events. The brightness of the flashback can be attributed to the animators wanting it to feel pure and hopeful, in contrast to what Zaun usually represents with its dark, gloomy, and threatening ambiance. But even if we disregard all of these facts, even if we take for granted that somehow Vander's childhood, teenage years, and young adulthood were all seemingly so bearable that he looked that unbothered and that unscathed in what I can only assume is like his early 20s, we are still left with a huge contradiction. Because what little have we heard of Vander's past? To top this off, if you're forming an answer right now, what information do we have about his current occupation? His status as a bartender who defends his patrons from unjust thugs fits into the mold that Season 2 offers us. His compliance to work with the enforcers to avoid more bloodshed fits into the mold as well. His adoption of down-under-luck children and his fatherly behavior towards them also fits the mold. This is all great. Yet, every hint that concerns his past tells us a different story. We even have clues that Vander is still engaging in illegal behavior from his trip to Benzo's shop. Benzo and him discuss about,
"You're a little early. Our guys are still rounding up this month's collections. Won't have numbers until it's done."
A direct reference to payments that people in Zaun owe them. From his altercation with the traders at his bar, he is established as a figure of authority, someone whose title inspires fear and respect. The Hound of the Underground. And how did he become the Hound of the Underground, you ask? In a place like Zaun, there is no doubt that it involved phenomenal violence. We know that he used to be a violent maniac, bloodthirsty, and consumed by rage. He tells Vi that his anger caused tragedy to strike the lanes on the bridge. We see him pound into enforcers, probably to a lethal extent in one of the first shots of the show. He attempts to murder Silco in a relatively brutal manner. When Marcus makes the mistake of coming into the last drop to intimidate Vander, he relays that Silco, and I quote, had some stories about Vander, how the Hound of the Underground was not always a peacekeeper. Vander answers this with a threatening mention that blood is difficult to clean off of his weapon of choice, a pair of cast iron gauntlets that he borrowed from the time when he worked in the mines. This weapon is a token with a double reference to his past. His name itself, being known as a hound, evokes violence to protect a dangerous beast. It is meant as foreshadowing because, as we all know now, Vander will become the blood-craving and wildly ferocious Warwick. In all these instances that refer to Vander's past, the same conclusion is always reached. Vander was not some little bright-eyed, smiling, well-meaning saint. He felt inner torture and was overflowing with rage. He was ready to get revenge on Piltover by all means necessary in his youth, using violence and criminal acts to become the Hound of the Underground.
I ran into an old friend of yours. He had some stories. You weren't always the peacekeeper, were you?
Yeah, well, you can't escape the past.
when Marcus, a law enforcer, conspicuously tells Vander, a known criminal, that Silco had some stories about his past. I doubt he meant flirting with pregnant women. If all it takes to rule the underground is flirting with purple-haired women, then Vi would have toppled Silco within a day. Call me crazy, but it's almost as if they didn't plan to make Vander and Silco's fallout a clumsy love triangle, as if some idiots merely added that in for season 2, falsely thinking it would be interesting and pertinent to the story. To me, all these inconsistent details just prove that there was a blatant lack of reflection when they added this storyline to the second season. As an enormous fan of Arcane, it's really just disappointing that they accepted this oversight. Chapter 3: The Impact of League of Legends lore, or lack thereof. As you can tell, this section will regard Warwick more heavily, since Vander's character serves as the starting point for an iconic League of Legends champion. It is not nonsensical to consult the source material. In my very personal case, because I had the luxury of 3 years' time to wait before season 2 came out, I got to work and used that time wisely, cherishing every second. I do not think that anyone in my personal life, or anyone at all, to be honest, understands the depths that my obsession for Arcane reached during those 3 years, because it led me to become extremely knowledgeable and obsessed with the wider variety of League of Legends content and lore in general. Warwick, like many other Zaunite and Piltover champions, has a different backstory in the show than what it was initially in League of Legends. However, the inspiration is clear as day. I will also say that I set myself up for disappointment by becoming so obsessed and enchanted by Warwick's storyline and characteristics in League of Legends. Let's remember that at that time we had no real confirmation that Vander would become Warwick. It was just highly speculated by the fans. If I had not been so excited about Warwick and so convinced about his backstory, maybe the reveal of his forced love triangle with Silco and Felicia would have been less jarring and revolting for me. The idea of Warwick in League is that he is more monster than human, and that he remembers nothing from his past life. The only thing he knows is that he used to be depraved, he used to be a criminal, and his uncontrollable thirst for blood as Warwick is consistent with the cruelty and violence he used to inflict on others. The Warwick of League is almost a vigilante of sorts, who roams the streets and dismembers, disembowels, and devours crooks, seeking to eradicate the filth of the underground, but doing all of this with only a vague sense of humanity, because he is controlled by pure rage, can take implants, and an obsessive thirst for blood. Blood makes him lose all control. And of course, these ideas all seem to have been implemented very well, but I was sorely disappointed that when the team who worked on Arcane got a chance to show us the young Vander, they served us some half-coherent love triangle scheme with a bright-eyed, happy-go-lucky Vander. Because at least in my perception, everything pointed at Vander being unbelievably corrupt, twisted, and committing dark crimes, perhaps with some self-hatred and guilt thrown in there to hint at his future redemption. I am perfectly aware that I focused on only one of many, many facets of Warwick's lore, but if I sit here and talk my mouth off about every single detail and how they were executed wonderfully in Arcane, we're not going to leave anytime soon. Or you may leave, but I'll stay here and ramble to myself for another hour. Chapter 4: What Alex Yee has revealed. Despite all that I have brought to your attention, even after having watched and analyzed Season 2 multiple times, I personally still preferred and chose to believe that Silco, Vander, and Benzo were involved in less than legal and less than moral schemes. That is up to the moment of Vander and Silco's famous feud, of course. Since all the elements were there, I dug my head in the sand about the love triangle indications, too disgusted to pay them any heed, and kept my initial hypothesis about Vander's past. Although Silco's past is also an important part of this, he remained a criminal and only became worse with time, while Vander attempted to redeem himself. That is why it is more crucial to me that Vander's past should have been undoubtedly painted as a violent upbringing, leading him to make difficult choices. So far, it is a lot easier to guess that Silco went down a dark road, but the idea that Vander went down a similar path was completely ignored. Although, as I've repeatedly been saying, it is logical with all the context we possess for these characters. On November 12th, 2025, Riot Games published the first episode of a miniseries titled Arcane Looking Back. Every episode features some of the awesome people who brought the show to life. In the first episode, titled Untold Stories, Alex Yee, who is one of the two co-creators of Arcane, covers a few alternate takes and what they call fragments of the Arcane. I won't even bother to reword what he said. Let's just take a listen together. Sounds good?
Vander and Silco. There's always a lot of interest in what happened, you know? We had a bit of headcanon for what it was that they did. One specific take that we had for it was that there was this trio in the olden days, you know, Benzo and Vander and Silco. They're rough around the edges, and Piltover was a place with a lot of cautious regulation. The way they funded this dream of theirs was, well, they knew the tunnels really well, so they could smuggle things around. They did a little bit of smuggling in order to, you know, pay the bills. Benzo got caught doing this. This was at a point where Piltover wanted to make an example of him. This thing with Benzo forced Silco and Vander to say, like, you know, should we stop acting like criminals? You know, should we act like citizens? The people from the Undercity were never going to be seen as equal. And I think that just struck a nerve with Silco. And despite the fact that the really important agreement between him and Vander ahead of time was that this was going to be peaceful and this was going to be done right, Silco knew he was going to rescue Benzo no matter what. Vander, after specifically losing people that he did see as family, and I think, you know, the most gut-wrenching part of it was Vi and Powder, and, you know, having to somehow try to explain to them why their parents who followed him weren't coming back. It made it that he had the same reaction that Silco had, you know. I think that the bottled up frustration was more than he could deal with, and he turned on him, and that's why I think in that third episode, it's a genuine apology.
I'm a patient person, I can wait, and I waited for this. Since Act 2 came out, I waited for this not unlike Penelope waited for Odysseus to return to Ithaca in the Odyssey. Call me pathetic, but I craved some validation that I was not purely insane in imagining something that did not exist. Because everywhere I looked online, people were very enthusiastic about the love triangle, or Jinx's hairstyle, or Felicia's nail polish. Meanwhile, I was spiraling all alone. I will necessarily comment on the video we just watched, worry not. You'll notice how when he explains the reasoning and the depth of the potential backstory for Vander, Silco, and Benzo, he can make direct references to scenes in the first season. It is painfully obvious that Alex Yee believes in this headcanon, or at least that is how the editing of the video makes it seem, because he states,
and that's why I think in that third episode, it's a genuine apology.
And I used the verb state because he is making a statement and approaching this backstory as if it is the truth. Unlike the other examples of untold stories he gives in the video, this one is entirely logical. This story for Vander and Silco matches perfectly with the canon events from the season, and it is so clear, at least to me, that every detail and hint we got in season 1 was constructed with this story in mind. Everything we knew then backs this story up to perfection. Personally, it could not have been made any more crystal clear that some idiot on Netflix forgot that this wasn't yet another trashy romance movie, so they pushed the idea of a love triangle, and the writers who actually care about Arcane and about the League lore that inspired this amazing show had to sacrifice their actually great, actually sound, and actually interesting plot for these two characters. Right. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, this turn of events pleased me extraordinarily. Thank you so very much for listening to me and sharing my love of Arcane today. I hope my own reflections inspired you to confront even a masterpiece like Arcane critically. I love Arcane so much. I wish you a very pleasant rest of your day. And if you'd like to consume more content from me, do not hesitate to encourage my labor of love with a comment or a like. After all, I have a lot of rambling planned about Mbessa, Chosen of the Wolf, because yes, obviously I read the book this summer. Would that interest you as my next discussion? If so, you know what to do.